All right. So I guess today we're going to be talking about playtesting, or let's see how it goes, right?
Yeah,
I guess that is playtesting, right? Let's see how it goes.
let's see how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, I'm Dennis Ramirez.
I am Charlie Mackin.
Let's talk. So we were at Protospiel this weekend, right? We were playtesting one of our games, Primetime. I think it's pretty fun. It's a deck builder.
Yeah, and the whole thing with Protospiel is that you're supposed to bring a prototype. So everybody is expecting games that are only partially done or have kinks to be worked out. Like you don't have to come with a completed project with like beautiful art. So it's made for playtesting. And not everyone who shows up is there to show off games. A lot of people show up just to play games and they know what to expect. So it's a really nice kind of low stakes environment to get a lot of playtesters in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and you did one of these previously, right? Like for another board game sort of deal.
Yeah, I did one a God, like 5, 6 years ago. It was pre-COVID that I went to one.
Yeah.
And I was there all weekend long, like all day, all night. It was very tiring. And I think that it can get to people definitely late at night. People can start to get like crabby or not be able to play some of the longer games, but like it's still fun overall.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then, local stuff happens all the time in terms of playtesting. So I know we were out at a playtest with Glitch. I know we've run playtests ourselves that are a little bit different, like not the open playtests like this. But this was really nice to have like an open sort of playtest where people could just be like, hey, I have a cool game. Come over here and try it. What I thought was really cool too is that like they had different tickets. So it wasn't just like here are all of the game makers, right? Here are some playtesters.
But it's a bit of a double-edged sword because everybody who's there is either there because they are designing board games or because they play a lot of board games and card games.
That's true.
So you're not exactly getting necessarily what your core audience would be, maybe depending on the game that you're doing, but it's definitely for people who have done a lot of that background. So the feedback that you're going to get is going to be a little bit skewed in that direction.
That's true. That's a good point. But yeah, the fact that like there were people there just to playtest was really cool because I've also been to some playtests where like everybody's just at their station and they don't want to go anywhere else because
Yeah.
they want people to play their games but not necessarily other people's games, right? Like that sort of deal.
Yeah, and like they're pretty explicit on their website that to be a good member of this, to be part of it, like you should be playtesting as often as other people are playtesting yours.
Hmm.
Like if someone playtests your game, you should offer to playtest their game just so that nobody feels like they playtested all weekend and didn't get any feedback on their own game. But
Yeah.
it is really hard to do that equitably because some games are very, very long and complex, and some games are very short and snappy. And if you're there without a partner, like Dennis and I had each other, which was nice, but if it's just you, then like taking down and setting back up your game every time you go to playtest can take a long time. And
Hmm.
so it's a little bit hard to balance, try to do your best with it. I remember when I went to one for Decorum a couple years ago, I like barely play tested anyone else's games. And
Hmm.
that's because I had a lot of people who wanted to try playing my game and it was pretty short. And I wanted to be there when they were playing it. I didn't want to like leave and not run the table. And so I felt bad about that. But it kind of depends on what kind of game you have.
Yeah, we had a pretty steady flow of people wanting to play our games too, which was awesome. I remember even when we were playtesting someone else's game, there were people there like picking up the cards, kind of looking at it. Like you said, I think there was a good draw to the fact that we aimed for a shorter experience, something that you could pick up really quick and play really quick. And but I think that it's kind of hard if you're going into something like this expecting a playtest of a game that takes like 2 hours, 3 hours. There's probably a lot of different ways that you can approach it that gets you some level of feedback, but it feels super, super weird to be like, oh yeah, I'm playtesting here for like a 3 hour game and the first hour is just learning it, especially if
Mhm.
you're there trying to get feedback on your own game.
Yeah, I think also part of the reason why we were successful in getting playtesters, not just the time, but is also because you put in the work to be the second player. We could have asked for pairs of two people and explained it to both of them and then helped them out playing it. But I think we were more successful in getting stragglers because we were like just asking individual people if they wanted to play. And then you were so good about actually sitting and playing with each of these people and like explaining as you played, and like that's very tiring after a while, which is why think a lot of people don't want to do it. They want to explain the game and then just watch, and you actually
Yeah.
like sat and played it. So I appreciate that, and I think we probably got a lot more people because of it.
I mean, I was 100% interested in the tuning, and there were some combos that I wanted to get off too. So selfishly, I did want to just like go in and like try and play it out, right? There were some cards that we had in there that we were like, is this balanced? Is it not balanced? And I was trying to draft those cards specifically. There's a little bit of what, like, Wizard of Ozing sort of going on, right? Like, especially with the board game playtesting. If you don't know the term like Wizard of Oz, it's the whole like, it works because there's a man behind the curtain doing things, right? So I know that I was looking at pain points, and on the fly I was trying to address those pain points so that we could still play the game. Like, I think one of the ones that popped up was like, it's a drafting game, right? So you had cards in a single pile, and no one wanted to draft this specific card. So I was like, okay, I'll go ahead and draft that because I want to do reality. And really I'm thinking like, oh no, this is going to clog my deck. But
yeah, being there to run it is really important. Even if you had instructions, I think running it would still be really important. You have to be teaching it on the fly if you don't already have instructions written out, and that kind of lets you play with it. But it's not like we could just write the instructions. That's its own whole thing.
yeah.
Writing instructions that are clear and fast and easy to parse is like, and it's an entirely separate design process from the design of the game, right? Like, it's a totally separate skill. It's extremely important. And like, we didn't have time to do that, or it wasn't a very high priority to get here. And because it's proto spiel, we didn't need to do it.
Now that I think about it, like, some of the games did have the creators in it, like kind of running one of the slots, but I play tested quite a few where that wasn't the case either. And I feel like that's selfish in some ways because you're taking up more of the people there, and I don't know, like, you could be playtesting some other thing. I get like trying to see like, okay, if I didn't play it like as a completely naive user, like that's a good use case for it. But I don't know. I feel like you have to be one of the seats.
Right.
We did have a session where there were 2 novice players, but that kind of organically came out of like the first person playing through it and being like, oh, this is cool. I think my partner would like to play it, and I'm gonna go and have them play it with me, which was cool.
Right.
But
And
yeah.
you know, even if you weren't like technically one of the seats, you were like over the shoulder watching the cards, pointing
Yeah.
things out, like basically playing along, you know.
Yeah, I was trying to help the new person because the other person was like trying to combo off already.
Yeah, so that's like another etiquette thing where if you're not going to play the game with the person, then you need to like fake playing the game with the person. I think that anyone playing a new board game has the anxiety of not knowing if they're doing it right. And then if
Yeah.
you're playing a board game that is unfinished and doesn't have instructions, and you're in a room full of people staring at you while you're doing it, it's just like an etiquette thing to just like follow along, help them play it, make sure they don't miss anything, you know, like make sure that they don't feel dumb while they're playing it.
Right.
I think it's important.
Or stuck, right? Or decision paralysis too, right? Because there's so many things out there, especially like card-based games and stuff, where it's like there's a bunch of text to read here, right? Like being able to say like, oh, I think you're drafting this, or this would really help you, and like highlight it.
Yeah, I did play one game this weekend where specifically what they were looking at was their rules. So they had me read through the rules, or at least skim them, and then start playing. And then they wanted to
yeah.
see like, what misconceptions did you have, or what initially. But they didn't really like make me do it in like a testy way. It was more like skim over these and then we'll start. And then like I kind of just talked as I was playing, and then they would catch me. And it wasn't like they asked like, well, why did you think that? They just let me move on and keep playing, and they just made a note of it. So that's nice. It's like letting playtesters be helpful, but also allowing them to have some fun, because like sometimes you can get so into getting the information that you need out of it. It's like you're not actually even playing or having fun.
Yep. Oh, so I had a question that I've been meaning to ask you about this that I wasn't able to ask you yet, but we both have siblings, right?
Yes.
Does that help in this? Like, I remember that almost always I would be the one introducing the new game. So I think part of how I approach the playtest is because of that. I just remembered my brother being like, oh, okay, I have to learn a new game. And I'm like, I'm going to make it as easy as possible for you to play it. So I've adapted that sort of style, I think, because I'm like, if I don't get it right and if I don't convey the stuff well, you're never going to play it again.
Right, which is funny because you're the older sibling
Mm-hmm.
and I'm the younger sibling, and I feel like I have the inverse of that, where it's like
Oh.
when I'm introducing a game to someone and I'm like desperately trying to make sure that like they understand it, it's easy. It's because I'm like, oh, I hate being introduced to new games and like
Mm-hmm.
it makes me anxious and like I'm afraid I'm not going to be good at it. And I'm like projecting that feeling onto them and then trying to fix it. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, probably has to do with some of that. That's the ones that I'm viewing it from.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, if you had to set up your own like ideal playtest, would there be any rules or expectations that you'd have around that?
Ideal playtest for what, I guess is the question.
Yeah, because there is a big difference between like the board game and video game playtesting,
Yeah.
right?
I
Yeah.
think like an interesting thing about Protospiel is that it's all board game and like
Mm-hmm.
all board game people, and like you and I enjoy board games and have made plenty of board games, but like I think we identify as video game people for
Yeah.
lack of a better word.
I mean, the secret is that they're all basically the same thing. It's just real time return based. So,
Oh my God. Yeah. Um, so I think a couple things that I like a Protospiel is a lot of the etiquette that we've already talked about. The setup space is good. I maybe wish that there was a little bit more emphasis on like changing things as you went. I Some people I saw were doing that, or like they would introduce the specific thing that they wanted to test that round, or they would like write something down as they were going. But a lot of people were there to test the same iteration of their game all weekend and then take that data and make changes after the weekend was over. And I think that some of that comes from like being afraid that a change they make on the fly is going to be terrible. And, you know, some of that comes from just like you've brought a prototype that you've worked on. And so you want to see more of it than just like one person doesn't like something. So you're going to change it. That's fine. That's valid. But like, I think that if there was more of like the paper cutters and markers and
mm-hmm.
pencils and like more people like the culture of like I just tried this so now I'm going to change something and try it again, I think that that would be helpful because I did see a lot of games that like did not change anything over the whole weekend because the idea was they were going to change it after they have gotten the data from the weekend, which is fine, but it makes me wonder the motivation. Like, is the motivation purely because they wanted to get more views in that type, or is it because they were afraid to change it during the weekend, you know?
Yeah. I don't know if it was just that the games were at different stages or what, but I think there was definitely a difference between like people who are going there and are like collecting notes and trying to change things on the fly or change things from one day to the next versus people, like you said, who were trying to just grab a bunch of different playtesters over the course of 3 days and then doing a change based off of all of that. And I can see both approaches, one of them being more like, you know, a tuning sort of thing where it's like it's the famous Nintendo like double it up, right?
Yeah.
And see if it gets to where you want it to go, or have it make those big changes and see if you can narrow into like where you want to go, versus the ones that are like close to the end and you're like, okay, hey, we have commissioned art but we're still tuning it. I personally wouldn't want like any commissioned art until I was past the big and swingy stage of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We weren't really afraid to go in there and like mark it up with like, this is a 2 now or this is a 1 now. And there were some people there who definitely could not have done that because they had like print ready stuff and it would have looked bad marking that stuff up. But at the same time, I feel like you should be able to do it.
We are very scrappy, get something out there early prototype type people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like we show up with like bad clip art on our cards and we
Mm-hmm.
print them off and cut them out that morning. And then if we want to change something, we take a pen and we scribble on the card and change it. And we get a lot of feedback about like, hey, have you considered putting art on this card? You
Yeah.
know, and it's like, that's fine. You know, like it's easy to get notes on art, and some of the notes are really good about like what they would expect or about like layout or whatever, but like it's an easy note to say there's no art, you should add art. Like that's fine. I think that I'm fine with that trade-off because I want to be quick about it,
Hmm.
but I think there's a lot of people who have this idea of like if it's really beautiful, like you're going to get a better playtest, you're going to get notes that are better. You're not going to get the notes about the art. And it's like we always hand wave like, yeah, we're going to change the art later, but we do still get the notes. And like maybe if we had better art, we would get feedback past that. You know, they'd be spending more
Hmm.
time thinking about the mechanics instead of getting stuck on the art. So,
I think we aim for that, like, it's polished enough where it's not going to get in your way, but not so unpolished that it's going to take you out of it. We try and aim for, like, the title is clear, the cost is clear, like, there's a sense that this is where the art's going to go. I think that that's a really nice place to be because then people can give you suggestions about art, but generally they're like, oh, well, this is placeholder. And they don't get hung up on that, which I think is
mhm.
really nice. And when you're looking to test the mechanic, like, you want them to know there's going to be art, not really get hung up on that too much, but have enough of the theme come through, especially if it helps in terms of play or in terms of like envisioning, that it's productive for the playtest, right?
Right. And I think that, it's a spectrum of like where you'll get hung up, totally depends player to player. Like how
Yeah.
much art do you need before you get hung up? And I think also there's an important distinction between like art and polish and theme
Yeah.
versus like content and UX, like
Mm-hmm.
is the card laid out in such a way that it's easy to play? Is the
Mm-hmm.
card like readable? Is the font big enough? Versus like does every card of a certain type have its own unique art on the card versus are they all the same one to save time? And I think like we really want the UX and the clarity and the usability. And so I think like that's just the spectrum of like where we land versus where other people might get hung up or land.
I think we have some tricks that we use though. Like font choice I think is one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if we because it's true, like for video games too, right? Like if I know the theme, I try and look for a font that matches that theme or conveys that theme. Because if you have your default like Common Sans or Times New Roman on everything that you put out there, it's going to convey something very different than it's a mystery game. And so, like, it looks like a typewriter font or something, right? It does a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah. And, it's another interesting thing that like, I don't know if this is true for every publisher, but my publisher told me that they don't like it when a game that they're looking at potentially buying for licensing has a ton of really beautiful art in it right off the bat, because to them that means that the designer may be very stuck on that art or may be very like, argumentative about changes. And they get a little bit worried about like, okay, are these negotiations going to be bad? Is the relationship going to be soured if I want to bring
Hmm.
someone else in? And my game Decorum, when we first showed it, it had clean art, it had cute art, it fit the theme, but like a lot of it, like I drew on my iPad. And it's like, I'm not a terrible artist, but I'm definitely not a professional artist. And it's like, it was clear and clean and like it looked nice, but it didn't look like it was going to be on a shelf in Target. Right.
Hmm.
And like, then when he came in, he changed it because he was like, this is cute, but we want the colors to be more prominent because it stands out more on a shelf. And that's
Yeah.
not something that I had considered. And if I had been really, really steadfast on like, no, I want you to keep the blueprints, then we would have had like this whole fight about it. And he's the publisher and it would have been hard,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And
Right.
so it's like,
You don't want to start with that, right?
right.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you have to pick and choose depending if you like want to be published. If you're self-publishing, you can do whatever you want. But
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you want to be published, you kind of have to pick and choose and deciding what you're okay with them having input on, and art's just part of it. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely something I think we saw. There was another game that we played, but they didn't really want any sort of input. And I thought that that was kind of odd. We were making some like UI, UX sort of like suggestions, and they were like, oh, yeah, we can just like fix it in post.
Hmm.
Not my preference on that, right?
Right. Which is where I think like the difference between like UI, UX and art is important and they can really get conflated,
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, you can change out the art, but like if an artist comes in and they don't know that that needs to be in a different location on the card, who's going to tell them, and who's going to like decide where that other location is, and like how hands-on or hands-off do you want to be, and all of that. I do think that part of why people get a lot of like UI UX and art notes at playtesting events like this
Mm-hmm.
is, funnily enough, kind of an etiquette thing that people
Hmm.
do, because I know that I have played games where, I don't want to comment on the main mechanic of the game, even though I have comments, because for whatever reason, I feel like my comment would be invalid in this instance. For example, like I'm playing a game of a type that I don't like, and so if I comment that I don't like this thing, I know that the reason why I don't like it is not because of that game in particular. It's because I don't like that type of mechanic. Or I play a game where I like it, but I think it could be better if they did something else. But that something else that I would suggest would be different enough from what they were going for that I feel like I would be suggesting a large change to their game that they wouldn't be open to. And I feel like it would be rude to suggest a very large change to their game. And so then when you're in an instance like that where the only design feedback you can get, you feel like either wouldn't be welcome or wouldn't be helpful, you almost kind of fall back into art and UX and UI kind of considerations. I don't
Yeah.
know if you feel that way.
Yeah, no, I totally see where you're going with that. As a person bringing your game in, you should probably be pretty clear about what kind of feedback you're looking for. And I think at this weekend, it was pretty good. Most of the time, even the testers were like, what kind of feedback are you looking for? So the etiquette was there. And I think that's probably because they were designers too, right? So they were like, okay, I've been in your situation where I'm looking for feedback, but maybe I wasn't clear about which one. And then, like you said, it gets into this, well, I don't like the owls. And if the game is about owls, then there's really nothing you can do about that,
Mhm.
right? So if you're open about that, or if not just open, but if you're clear about that, then you can get better feedback from that if you're just clear about that.
Right. And then there's the opposite side of that too, where it's like not only like being good at giving feedback, being good at asking for feedback, but being good at receiving feedback. Even if someone suggests something that is ridiculous or so far away from what you wanted, or just like not true, based off something that like that isn't true, whatever, you kind of have to be good at taking that in and
Mm-hmm.
not being offended and just
Mm-hmm.
moving on. Like, I always feel like if someone gives a piece of feedback and you immediately explain to them why it doesn't work, that doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if someone gives feedback and you say, "Oh, we've tried that and this is what happened before," that's slightly better, but still doesn't totally feel good. Um, I almost feel like in a lot of cases, if you're getting feedback that like doesn't align with what you're looking for, it's almost always better just to like write it down or say thanks or ask for more information than move on than it is to try to like explain your side of it or argue with the feedback giver, because they aren't your co-designer and like they don't have to be part of the decision making process.
Yeah.
So like it's not like you're trying to convince them, because they don't need to be convinced because it's your game. So don't try to convince them, just take the feedback and move on, kind of thing.
Right, right. I think a lot of people fall into that because they so desperately want the idea to come across. You always want your players to understand where you're coming from, right? So I can see the temptation on that for sure. What is your favorite way to ask for feedback then? Like a general sort of deal? Do you have a way that you like asking for feedback on that?
Um, I think sometimes it helps when I point out things at the start that like I already know about, because then they can kind of like have a starting place and I've already set the tone of like I'm giving myself a little self-criticism so you know that I can take it. Like I think I started out before being like, okay, great, we're done playing. Like, what feedback do you have? Like, I already know that the art is all placeholder, not great. And I already know that like, this font needs to be bigger. It's way too small. What else are you noticing? Or like how did playing it feel? And it's kind of like I'm already setting them up for like there are multiple things wrong with this. I already know what some of them are, like add on, rather than kind of
Hmm.
putting them on the spot. So that's been helpful for me at least.
Right, like giving them hooks or stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think there's two that I really like. One of them is a more open, and this one helps a lot too. Like, it wasn't something that we would have needed on this protospiel because there was a lot of designers. There was a lot of like, they know how to do a critique, right? But if you're in a more general area, setting them up with the I wish, I like, what if always kind of helps in terms of compartmentalizing that. Especially, yeah, right. It's almost easier to find something wrong with something than to give the positive feedback. And the positive feedback is just as important. I get trying to go in and trying to fix things, but if you're just looking at the things that you're trying to fix, you can do a lot of damage to the game too, because then you're like, oh, I need to fix that stuff, and then you neglect what makes it fun in the first place, right? So I like that because it sort of phrases it as like, I really like this, and you think about that, and then you bring up the thing that was maybe irritating you, but it also forces you to think about like, well, what would you have done differently? And that's not necessarily required, but it is nice to see where someone's coming from, and it's maybe a little more constructive. But if I had a general sort of question, I really like asking, what would you want more of?
I was just going to say,
Yeah.
we got really good results when you were asking that this weekend, and I definitely caught on to that. That was getting us the best results. It was super fun because like we were getting multiple kinds, right? Like you would say like, what do you want more of? And people would find things that they didn't like and say, I want more of this thing that stops that from happening. Or they would say like, oh, this thing felt really, really good, and I want that to happen more often. So it's not even like it's inherently positive or negative, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good design philosophy because, like, at the end of the day, if you reframe it as like, you know, what did you like best about this, or what would you want to see more of, then they can really lean into like, I wanted to make more episodes, or I really liked how this card worked. And then if you just double up on that, I think it moves you into the direction of finding your own style and finding your own, like, what works with your game, what works really well with your game, and what does it do differently from other people.
Right. You're not just making like another fine deck builder. You're like taking the best part of your idea and kind of like polishing that rather than trying to fix all of the holes everywhere else.
Right, because everything ships with holes. Everything ships with bugs, right? So might as well just get it like super, super fun. I would rather play a game that is buggy but really fun than like something that is rock solid but kind of just bland.
True.
I just wanted to make a quick note that I was number 151, which I thought was awesome because I love Pokemon, and that's like the Mew number. So.
I should have looked what number I was. I didn't even look.